Choosing an emergency contact, whom to pick, and why it matters. Keep in mind that your emergency contact may have a bigger job than you think. He or she may even need to make life or death decisions on your behalf, so you shouldn't take the selection process lightly. Before writing someone's name on your medical forms, at the back of your driver's license, or on any other important documents, make sure that the person you want to name is trustworthy, healthy, willing to serve in that capacity, and aware of what it really means to be an emergency contact. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of the Sweetie Kiwi Show. How you doing today? I hope you are doing fantastic. I'm doing marvelous if you were to ask me. And today I want to talk to you about choosing an emergency contact, whom to pick, and why it matters. The first thing I want you to pay attention to is to make sure your emergency contact is on board. You may feel confident that the person you name will have no problem acting as your emergency contact. Is that really true? This may be true for some, but not true for others. So don't forget to tell them that you have given them that job. The job is very important. Making sure that you and your loved one are on the same page will also avoid a terrifying surprise in the event that they were actually needed. And it will also give you a chance to make sure that the person you have chosen has the necessary information to act as your advocate. Besides, it really makes sense. This is just a matter of courtesy if you think about it. It makes sense to ask your emergency contact to be available during any specific procedures. Let's say you're going to the hospital or something happens. You want to inform the person, you want to notify them that, hey, listen, be on the lookout. Something might happen and you might be called. So if the person you name is often tied up at work or has any other obligations or is not available, he or she may not be the ideal person to act as your emergency contact. So you want to make sure that this person is on board. And this can be very simple if you have a conversation with a person where you can sit down and discuss things that really are important to you, the ins and outs of the position, quote unquote, position of emergency contact, and what you expect from the person. The second thing you want to think about is to get help if you need it. If you have questions or concerns about the rights of your emergency contact, or about how to make documents that describe your medical wishes, or medical wishes, because this happens when you go to the hospital, or if you were to be involved in a car accident, you want to name an agent to make medical decisions on your behalf. You can reach out to a specialist. Here you can reach out to an experienced estate planning attorney, right? Some people are not lucky enough to have relatives or friends who are willing to take on that job, the job of emergency contact. If that's your case, what you want to do is just quickly reach out to a lawyer and make sure the lawyer can understand your needs and wants and aspirations. So doing a little advanced planning can help make a very difficult situation less stressful for everyone involved. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about once you make sure the person is on board, and you can, if you reach out to a lawyer and everything is fine, you want to give your emergency contact the legal power to act on your behalf. Because an emergency contact is the first person medical personnel will get in touch with in an emergency. But that contact may not have the legal authority to act on your behalf unless you explicitly provide that power. The key word here is explicit. Simply because you're a friend of the person or you are her husband or his wife doesn't mean that authorities will grant you that legal authority. So you want to grant the person the legal power to act on your behalf. For example, an emergency contact can answer questions and contact other people for you. But unless there is some legal relationship between you and your emergency contact, he or she won't have the authority to direct what kind of medical treatment you should or should not receive. This applies to friends. For example, if you put a friend on your card or on your medical form as an emergency contact, and there is no biological or legal relationship between both of you, you will need to create a specific power of attorney. Spouses and close family members usually have the legal authority to make such medical decisions on your behalf. Now, there are some states in the union that don't allow that. So you want to be very careful and you want to reach out to an attorney in your state to know exactly the intricacies of estate planning laws in your state. If your loved ones disagree about the type of medical care you should receive, for example, a fight about your treatment can potentially turn into a legal battle, and we want to avoid that, which is why very clearly you want to have the conversation beforehand with the person and give them explicit legal authority. So to avoid this possibility of a legal battle, you want to use a medical power of attorney to give someone and some alternates, in other words, backup persons, the power to make medical decisions on your behalf. Depending on your state's laws, this person is called your health care agent, surrogate, or proxy. So stating this choice in a legal document makes it clear to all involved who should make medical decisions about your health care if you cannot speak for yourself. Ideally, you want to name the same person to be your agent and your emergency contact, right? So someone that they can call, and the same person should be the one directing medical personnel about what kind of treatment you should receive. Since your emergency contact is the first person the doctors will notify in the event of an emergency, it makes sense. It makes sense that they also have the authority to make decisions about your medical care. I think what I'm trying to say here is that if you have the conversation, first of all, you want to make sure the person understands the ins and outs of the job. You want to have that conversation with that person, and you want to give them the legal power to act on your behalf. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Keyword. We are having a conversation today about choosing an emergency contact, whom to pick, and why it matters. And I first spoke to you about making sure your emergency contact is on board, getting help if you need it, and giving your emergency contact the legal power to act on your behalf. If you love the clarity and quality of the content so far, please consider subscribing to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you receive information from us promptly. You can also like this content, share, ask questions, comment below. We will certainly get back to you. I want to now explain to you the job of the emergency contact. You might think, and a lot of people think, that selecting an emergency contact is nothing more than a formality. But in reality, it's not. So when you fill out enrollment forms, when you complete paperwork at a new job, or when visiting a doctor's office, you think this is just a formality. But an emergency contact does more than just answer the phone if something goes wrong. The ideal emergency contact is able to talk to medical professionals about things like medical history, if you have allergies, chronic conditions, and current medications. So this is someone who is knowledgeable about you. So if you choose someone as your emergency contact, ideally you want the person to be as knowledgeable about you as possible. Of course, I'm not asking you here to divulge your secrets to the person. I'm just telling you that the person has to know a lot about you, so that if stuff happens, if God forbid something happens to you, you go into the ER, you're able to you're able to rely on that person's knowledge to direct medical personnel in the right direction, in the right destination in terms of caring for you. In some cases, an emergency contact can even make medical decision for the loved one. This can be a life-saving in an emergency. So it is critical to choose someone who's willing to do the job, can answer those questions, and who also has the legal rights to act on your behalf. As I said earlier, it is very common in marriages for couples to self-choose, to actually choose each other as their emergency contact. Parents and children usually choose their parents. Now, what about the elders? So elders can also choose their children or the next of kin. So if you're a senior citizen at a nursing home, you can choose, for example, your child, your daughter or son, or your next of kin, your brother or sister. If you have nobody, if you have no person around you, no family member around you, remember you can always count on an attorney. You can count on an attorney and empower that person through a legal power, through a power of attorney, and make sure the person becomes your healthcare agent or your healthcare proxy or your healthcare surrogate. You can also reach out to some members of your congregation. In some states, the authorities allow congregation members to act for one of their members, actually. So congregation, I would say religious congregation, religious leaders to act as a surrogate, as a healthcare surrogate for one of the congregation members. Now, we have to understand that your emergency contact is a gatekeeper of information. I was saying earlier that it is important that the job of an emergency contact is multifold. And I just explained to you that that job has many layers. So the person must be very knowledgeable about you, has to be very, very willing to serve in that capacity. Now let's talk about what's very important, which is the gatekeeper of information. What does that really mean? That means that your emergency contact should be aware of your privacy concerns. There are things you want to divulge and there are other things you don't want to divulge. This person will be acting as a gatekeeper of information about you, your doctors, and those who need to be aware of your situation, such as loved ones or employers. So that contact you should understand which loved ones to inform about your condition and what information to pass on, if any. Some emergency situations might arise from private medical conditions or procedures. Maybe you want everybody to know about it, or you just want to keep it private. So you got to be very careful in explaining to the contact, your emergency contact, what to divulge and when. If there is something you're not comfortable sharing with your loved ones, or if you want to limit the amount of info they receive, you want to notify your emergency contact of any privacy concerns beforehand. Remember, once you are in an emergency, you might not be able to talk or have the full area of your cognitive functions. So you want to do these things beforehand. This will help you avoid potential disclosures you're not ready to make. Your emergency contact should also know, for instance, which people should be notified in the event of an emergency. Maybe you don't want your boss to know that you have this particular medical condition, or you don't want your husband to know, or your wife to know, or your children to know, right? Let's say you want your emergency contact, for example, to inform specific family members about your condition, or you may not want your family informed at all. So discussing these possibilities in advance with your emergency contact will help you have a smooth process, and your contact can respect your privacy. Now, when it comes to privacy, you have to always prioritize written instructions over verbal ones. What I'm trying to say here is that it's always better, always advisable to write things down, to have specific instructions clearly written on paper. That way, your emergency contact, when in doubt, can always go back to that information and make sure that they are doing what you really would have wanted them to do. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. We are still having a conversation today around choosing an emergency contact, whom to pick, and why it matters. I want to talk to you now about making sure your emergency contact understands and respects your wishes. Because the last thing to consider is whether your emergency contact understands those wishes, and most important, is willing to carry them out. This is especially critical if your emergency contact is also your healthcare agent under your medical power of attorney. That's what I said earlier. If the person is also your healthcare surrogate, you want to be very specific about your wishes and make sure that he or she understands them and is willing to carry them out. If there are treatments or invasive life-saving procedures, for example, you do or don't want performed, you gotta make sure that your emergency contact understands and knows about your preferences and can implement them if you cannot speak for yourself. Going back to what I said earlier, you want to document your wishes for medical care. Traditionally, this is called a living will. In many states, a medical power of attorney and a living will are combined in one document, often called an advanced directive. Advanced directive. So this is legally analyzed on a state-by-state basis. So each state has its own requirements for healthcare directives, but it typically requires notarized documents that describe the type of medical care you want to receive. So you want to specify those things in your advanced directive. When you make your wishes legally known, your agent, in other words, your healthcare surrogate, and your doctors must do everything they can to follow your preferences for medical care. Doing this gives your emergency contact, healthcare agent, doctors, and family a clear understanding of your wishes. And courts have been clear in the last 20 to 30 years when it comes to complying with the patient's preferences and wishes. So courts will honor your wishes if they're clear enough, if they have been written down. Again, we're trying to stay away from verbal instructions or email instructions. No, you want something written down and notarized. You want the instructions to be notarized. You want your wishes to be notarized. You want the advanced directive, that document, to be notarized. I want you to make sure your emergency contact knows your medical history. I've spoken about talking to them about your wishes, your preferences, telling them what kind of allergies you have, what kind of, if you have allergies, what kind of situations you have, but you really want to give them the full picture of your medical history. Why? This is the person who will answer to medical authorities, who will answer to healthcare specialists, who will tell them, who will explain to them your preferences when it comes to treatments. So you want to let the person, you want to open a window into your medical history so the person understands exactly what they have to do. So if something happens, your emergency contact can very easily explain your medical history, allergies, or medications. Ideally, your contact will know that information and be able to communicate it to medical professionals in a speedy manner. Now, it is a good idea to provide this information during a face-to-face conversation, but you also want to give your emergency contact a written copy of your medical history. Remember, I've been focusing throughout this show about the importance of having things written. You can have a face-to-face conversation, you can have a Skype conversation, you can have you can fax the instructions, but it's always better to have a written copy of your medical history. Even if it's just a simple list, it doesn't matter. The idea here is simplicity, is clarity, is quality paperwork. That way, your emergency contact will not have to rely on memory in an emergency. Nobody wants that, right? Because what if your emergency contact is not in the right position or is not cognitively strong at that moment when you need them to remember your medical history? So have things written down. Sounds good. I have we want to end today's conversation now. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. I want to quickly recap today's conversation. So I've spoken to you about making sure your emergency contact is on board, getting help if you need it, giving your emergency contact the legal power to act on your behalf, understanding the job of the emergency contact, your emergency contact, making sure that he or she is a gatekeeper of info, making sure that your contact understands and respects your wishes, and finally, ensuring that your emergency contact knows your medical history. I will see you next time. But until then, remember, stay marvelous.